Please join me in welcoming to the stage Joseph Enriquez.
The title of my keynote is Mom, Look, He's Just Like Me, How Representation Saved My Life. My name is Joseph Enriquez. I am a speaker with the Get Real movement, and I am so happy to be here with all of you today. It really does mean a lot to share this space with you. To start, I would like to pose this question to all of you. Who do you see yourself reflected in the most? Who do you see yourself reflected in the most? Maybe take a second to really think about that. Maybe it's a parent, a mentor, a caregiver that you've had throughout your life. Perhaps it's a celebrity, an important figure in the world. Who knows? The possibilities are really endless. Throughout my journey, I've used representation as an avenue for a lot of great things. I have come out as transgender. I have taken pride in my heritage as an Afro-Latino person. Yet as I peel back the layers of who I am, I often wonder how I occupy space with that intersection and the impact that I can make in the world. When I was younger, Black trans representation was the answer. It showed me the possibilities of what I thought I had the potential of doing in my life. But this process wasn't so much about looking inward to discover the complexities of who I am. No, instead, it was about molding myself to other Black trans people I saw. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but there are a few different reasons why I choose to see representation as limitless now versus something that is exclusive to my Black trans experience. For starters, it allows me to make connections with all kinds of people from all walks of life. Of course, positive Black trans representation is important to me, but by recognizing that that part of myself isn't totally encompassing of who I am, it encourages me to carve out new spaces and search for belonging everywhere. I didn't always have this outlook though. I came from some pretty humble beginnings. My family immigrated to Canada in the 90s with nothing more than the clothes on their back. We're savvy, hardworking, and loving people, but we've also had our fair share of prejudices which have impacted how we viewed ourselves as well as the world around us. So when I was a kid, I remember always feeling quite odd, to say the least. I noticed that I had darker skin, curlier hair, different features than the rest of my family members. And of course, noticing this as a child, I was perplexed. And I one day asked my grandmother, how come I'm the only Black one? Like, what's the deal with that? She said that I wasn't really Black since my dad was never around. I was only Latino, shouldn't tell people about my Jamaican side because it didn't really matter. Made a note of that. I also didn't feel like a girl either. I remember after school spending all of my times playing with other boys my age. I would sneak into my uncle's room and try on his clothes when he wasn't home in secret. When I spent too much time with other boys, my grandmother would tell me to cut it out and act more ladylike. Made a note of that too. So fast forwarding a bit to my late childhood, about 5th grade, I'd already developed some pretty stern internal biases about my own community. Being Black was not something I felt particularly comfortable with, and the thought of telling someone I was really a boy trapped in a girl's body seemed impossible. I didn't feel very important to the world, and this idea was only further reinforced by the lapses in resources for people struggling within my community. In the neighborhood that I grew up in, there were not a lot of supports in place. So an inadequate education system, barriers to receiving proper health care, and a heavy police presence targeting people of color made me feel like I didn't belong. Even today, if my hood is talked about, the narrative that's often pushed about us revolves around gang activity, crime, and violence. Now, what people often don't realize is that we barely had the basic necessities for living. By 2002, I was around 3 years old at that point, only 70% of people in my neighborhood had proper indoor plumbing, as compared to 95% of Canadians. Over half of the residents lived below the poverty line. So when all of your attention needs to be directed at surviving, how then can you lead a life where you're trying to be your most authentic self? So the way that my family perceived Black people, their gender expectations towards me really played a role in how I felt about myself, but it was also due to the lack of Black trans representation, as well as the lapses in community support that I had struggled as much as I did. I didn't know why race or gender mattered as much as they did, but as I started to uncover more about who I was and how to navigate the world, I longed for a sense of belonging. I didn't feel like I could see myself reflected in anyone around me, so I kept my feelings inside and tried my best to fit in. Society had pushed me so far to the margins that I couldn't even envision a future for myself. But that all changed in one single moment. One day after school, I think I was about 12 years old, I was on YouTube, and a video popped up into my feed, and in the little thumbnail, I could see a Black individual with 2 big scars across their chest. And I remember this piqued my interests. I wanted to learn more. Clicked on it, not sure what to expect. I remember the person talking about their top surgery, what doctor they went to, the procedure, and then their emotions towards the whole thing. Now, it took me a little while to sort of piece everything together. It was a lot of new information for my 12-year-old brain. But when I finally did, a light lit up inside me. Transgender was the word that this person used to describe themselves. And up until that day, I didn't actually know there was a word for people like me. See, my perspective for what I thought I had the potential of doing in my life broadened that day. Up until then, I didn't feel like I could see myself mirrored in anyone around me. So this little bit of representation, this one person in this one YouTube video, was ultimately what saved my life. But after that day, I sought out that feeling of belonging exclusively through videos, forums, media, anything that I could get my hands on that showed me other Black trans people. So shortly after this experience, my mom decided she wanted to move us out of the hood to provide me more opportunities in life. So when I was 13 years old, we ended up moving on the outskirts of Toronto in a predominantly white neighborhood in a suburban community. And when we had moved, we had considered this a pretty big step up from where we had been residing prior. But this new environment carried its own set of challenges, and I tried adapting as best as I could. I often found myself concealing parts of who I was that coincided with my Blackness, such as my culture, my ethnic background. I lost a sense of who I was and felt disconnected from others, all to make other people more comfortable. I also felt the need to hide my gender identity from those around me. There was a very stark need to fit in. I remember so many days where I would rush home to watch YouTube videos online of other Black trans people talking about their experiences. I was heavily invested in doing research for trans resources around me to see how the process would look like if I ever decided to come out. So the more information I received with both representation and community support, the more feasible coming out became. So instead of imagining myself presenting as a woman for the rest of my days, I started envisioning my life being lived more authentically, whatever that meant. I remember my mom suspecting that I could potentially be part of the 2S LGBTQ+ community and would always tell me things like, "I'll love you unconditionally, even if you were." I guess she could kind of predict what was to come next. So the unconditional love from my mom was integral to my coming out, but I also had an amazing grade 8 class, a teacher that created an environment where I felt safe to do so. I knew it was the right time, and without this sense of love, support, I know I wouldn't have come out when I did. So I understand now, through my experiences, that I have a responsibility. With my work at the Get Real movement, I have shared my story with so many people, and I often wonder how I can be that representation for others in so many ways. It doesn't have to be limited to being Black or being trans or both simultaneously. It doesn't have to revolve around these complex details and subjectivities in my life, but it can, and that's the beautiful part. And so outside of my work at Get Real, sharing my story, being proud of who I am, has shown me the significance of breaking down walls, carving out new spaces, and searching for communities of love and support. I look up to so many different people in my life now, and when I share parts of myself to the world, I often learn more about where I need to be going and the impact that I can make. So being representative for the Black trans community, that to me is an act of resilience. It's like I'm proclaiming to the world, we're here, we exist, always will. Resiliency is everywhere. The experiences that I have gone through are echoed by the other people who have gone through very similar things, yet who still always find the strength to get up in the morning and to face the world. If you feel like you can be that representation for other people, then do it. Love yourself, represent your community, and open up those doors that have been closed for so long. Break down your internal biases, challenge the status quo. Oftentimes we'll come to find that there are so many people around us doing that exact same thing. It's so important for me now to live my life in the most authentic way possible. For me, for anyone, for everyone, I am that representation, I am that power, I am that strength. I want to thank you so much for giving me the time here today. I really do appreciate it a lot.